The name of the show is On the Move for obvious reasons, but one of us, between the two of us, definitely live up to that like on a regular basis. And it ain't me. We got Leanne Herring, of course. She's on the move. She's on the road. She's in Houston tonight and breaking things down for us. So we appreciate all of you being here at the Voice of College Football. Comments, questions are welcome. We got the call-in line in the chat as well. And again, Leanne Herring, Rebel Walk Director of Recruiting, Cat's Wire, and we're proud to say here at the Voice of College Football, of course. Leanne, how's it going tonight?
Doing good. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. I know we're running a little bit late. We were trying to do the rundown to bring you because there's been so much action going on, as you guys know, from the high school recruiting trail. I'm here in Houston, going to catch a couple of the tail end of some spring practices, catch up with some of the recruits we've been talking about, kind of see where their recruitment's going season. But man, Mark, the portal has been closed, but there's still plenty of free agents. But of course, we're going to start off and kick off the show with a name that we've talked a lot about, AJ Halsey, who went out in that one. We thought Miami was going to make a push. Ole Miss was making a push, but surprisingly, there was a dark horse when it was all said and done. Of course, USC, another top. Really Lincoln Riley and that whole staff out there really turning the tables, making some big pushes, getting some big commitments. We're seeing that a lot of the nation's we said that an area of concern for a lot of the depth charts this year and this off season, we're going to be the secondary, and plenty of schools are addressing that with the candidates and commitments. Some big name quarterbacks in the high school realm, 5 stars are off the board, heading to the SEC. And we have a couple guys heading over to Oxford, Lane Kiffin territory, inking some guys from the portal, filling those secondary needs, building that QB room. And there's one in particular that they've just had a commitment from, Mark, that we're going to talk a little bit more depth in. Having found his home verbally in a couple places, but we're going to see if Lane Kiffin and his staff can be his home sweet home with that commitment. So a lot of action, a lot of on the move. So let's get to it.
I've just dropped the call-in link back in the chat, so it's there a couple times, and we're going to go run through some of the most recent commits and signings, and then we'll get to some of your calls. And Leanne, even though in this news cycle that just happened so fast, it seems like this happened like 3 months ago because it was just a couple days ago, but we want to set the record straight on the guy that you mentioned because he is the number one safety in the transfer portal. And there was a big battle over AJ Halsey, first team all Big 12. This guy delivered 5 interceptions, 13 passes defensed, and for a safety to rack up 74 tackles is huge. And he goes to LSU, and there was so much talk about Miami, and one of his last trips was there. Ole Miss thought they had a shot, and Brian Kelly swooped in and grabbed, again, one of the best safeties in the country.
This was just surprising when Halsey hit the portal. He was a staple, of course, for 2 seasons, was a star contender, like you mentioned, Mark. Big 12 prior to being at Houston. He was a freshman standout, former All-American, setting all sorts of records at New Mexico. There really didn't seem like there was much going on, that there was trouble in the water down in Houston as far as him leaving for that 3rd season, looking to make another start. But as we know, in the transfer portal era, the NIL era, there's just so much of different moving parts. But we've seen just what elite defenses can do for a team in crucial moments. And it was no surprise when AJ Halsey, in fact, did hit the portal that so many teams were going to be looking to improve him, especially because there is such a need for depth in secondaries across the SEC, ACC, and all the major conferences. We thought that Miami, it seemed that was his first initial visit. We know that their defensive backs coach, former coach down in Houston, had ties with Halsey. So we thought that Miami seemed to be the case there. It seemed like it was going to be a strong fit. Obviously, the bankroll that Miami was putting forth was also a big playmaker. Ole Miss made a run for it. We thought that perhaps Ole Miss was finally going to buckle down, Mark, and spend that money to get an elite safety like Halsey. Unfortunately, Brian Kelly, in his unique approach to recruiting, we know that Brian Kelly has been the subject of many memes in his approach to the way he recruits. But man, he's done a hell of a job down there in Baton Rouge, securing some of the top talent, not just from the portal, like in a player like AJ Halsey, but on the high school recruiting trail. I mean, we talked about it last show about just how many 5 stars right now that LSU is holding on to in this 2026 class, the most 5 stars that a 2026 recruiting class has to date, putting him at that top of the portal. So again, things are definitely cooking in Baton Rouge. There's just been so many crazy storylines, but again, AJ Halsey committing to LSU, going to head into the SEC, man, and watch out for those SEC offenses. I've talked a lot about that. There's been this kind of hovering cloud over him. Of course, we know that he's put all sorts of numbers. We've talked about it the last couple of weeks. If you guys haven't tuned in, we've broken AJ Halsey down to a T. He's going to be the golden child for this LSU Bayou Bengals secondary. But another thing that I think that is going to be very welcome in the SEC is something that he, like I said, that I've mentioned off and on, that he's been really criticized, that one of maybe not so much of his strengths, surprisingly, is that he's over aggressive. But I think that this over aggression, his physicality, is going to fit right at home and just be exactly what that LSU secondary needs to beef things up. We saw this season that the LSU secondary had its moments, but also was very much needing that explosive talent that I think he brings to the thing. Like I said, he just really is one of those guys that I say in and out, watching him on film, watching him live play at Houston, and even dissecting his film when he was at New Mexico State. He's just got that sixth sense in reading and dissecting offenses. He interrupts routes and attacks immediately. He shows strength with his ability to play deep in the downfield. But I think he's really what I've always said, that his strong point as far as where he's most threat is at that line of scrimmage. And he's just an excellent coverage guy as a zone defender. So again, his instincts are going to, I think, translate strongly. And this is going to be a great fit. And talk about a win for the Bayou Bengals on the recruiting trail with the addition of safety AJ Halsey.
So once again, everyone, that's immediate help for LSU, as it seems to be a boom or bust year for Brian Kelly and company. 4th year for Brian Kelly. He's had a decent run at LSU, but nothing close to what he was expected to do. He was hired to win championships and compete in the SEC. They've fallen short, coming off 9-4, but they are locked and loaded up on the defensive side. We talked to our buddy Carter B from Power Hour LSU the other day, so he set us up on the LSU side. Jack Pyburn, a big incoming transfer from Florida, one of the best linebackers in the SEC, and now AJ Halsey coming in from Houston to LSU. I got to say, Leanne, when you mentioned the name Elbert Hill, I knew exactly what the deal was in regards to where he was headed, but I didn't realize this, because I'm going to fill everyone in a few minutes over an Ohio State commit coming from Santa Ana, California, so coming that direction toward the Midwest. But rarely does USC go to the likes of, when I saw this, I am very familiar with Archbishop Hoban Academy out of Akron, Ohio. And for him to get away from Ohio State as one of the best cornerbacks in the country, ouch. So Lincoln Riley making some moves and going to the Midwest to get Elbert Hill to commit to USC.
Well, I know that when I saw Archbishop Hoban, that you would know all about it. Of course, we know that's right in your backyard in Akron, Ohio. Talk about a big win for overall for USC. USC's definitely had a surge on its way to recruiting this past offseason. Like I said, really hitting it big. That front office has done a heck of a job in trying to secure some top talent, and they do it securing another top corner, and one of the nation's top corners is in this 2026 class in Elbert Hill. One of the smaller corners at 5'10" and weighing 175. He's the number 40 overall player in this 2026 class, Mark, the number 3 overall corner, and the number 1 athlete to come out of Ohio. And talk about a big steal, like you mentioned, that Ohio State was able to let such an elite blue chip talent in its own backyard heading out west. But ultimately he chose, and he felt like a fit was with the Trojans. He feels like what they're doing there, he was sharing that it's just there's a revitalization, there's a revival going down in USC, and he feels like he really can be a part of it. Some of the other schools, of course, that he was looking at was Ohio State, Oregon, LSU, and Alabama. As far as this 2026 recruiting pool is concerned, when we talk about Hill, Mark, he is the epitome of a lockdown quarter. We're looking at some of his film right here, and me having the opportunity to watch it. I mean, he plays at one of the top programs in the Midwest. I've also been able to see him actually, believe it or not, we talk about how the 7-on-7 world is a lot smaller world. He actually competes right here out of Houston for one of the best programs on the 7-on-7 circuit under Bro Simon, who's one of the best trainers and coaches at his program with Fast Houston. So I've had the opportunity to get to see him up and close and personal at the OT7s, of course, a few months ago in Dallas. He just possesses exceptional instinct and that closing speed that I always harp about. That closing speed, that separation when you're looking for a top level elite corner. Like I said, he is a nightmare matchup when it comes to speedy receivers. He's extremely athletic, and he's also, when it's productive, he's also productive. And like I said, what makes him really unique, like we talk about a lot of these elite players where he separates himself, not only is he a top corner, Mark, he also is pretty damn good on the other side of the ball when it comes to receiving. Just going over some of his stats, he had 4 interceptions, 3 PBUs, and scored 5 touchdowns. As a sophomore, he earned a spot on the first team All-State, where he had 7 interceptions, 2 returns for 2 touchdowns, 10 PBUs, and 7 total touchdowns. So when you're talking about Lincoln Riley getting the ultimate package on both sides of the ball, he definitely earned it. Obviously, he's going to be playing corner, but it doesn't hurt that you got a corner like that who definitely knows how to catch a couple touchdowns and receivers, and he's been doing it. And again, he's got a lot of high ceilings when it comes to his level. I think that his strongest suit when you watch his film as far as a corner is concerned, Mark, is that he can play both the outside and the inside slot very well. And again, another versatile playmaker that's really going to boost this USC class and continue to put them on the mark. Again, I think when you talk about and you talk with those kids that are heading over from all over, from the portal, and more so on the recruiting trail, going over to SoCal and joining Lincoln Riley's program, they just feel that there is a distinct revitalization going on down there that they can be a part of, and they're really looking to turn things around and really bring USC back to that prowess. Again, this is the 26 Trojan that Lincoln Riley is going to eat, which officially, as of now, has put them in the coveted #1 spot across all the major recruiting services. So definitely things are popping in SoCal as much as they are popping in Baton Rouge.
So when we mentioned Hoban Academy, Hoban High School in Akron, little trivia question out there for anybody. I'll let it kind of simmer for a while. Do we know any great athletes that might still be playing right now? Any great athletes? I guarantee everyone knows who this person is that's from Hoban High School. I'll just leave it out there. You can take some guesses at that one. Okay, Elbert Hill to USC, one of the best cornerbacks in the country out of Akron, Ohio. Georgia, of course, with a long line of talented quarterbacks, and typically have one of the best rooms in the country for quarterbacks. And Gunnar Stockton, most likely the guy here this fall, and Carson Beck moving out to Miami. Jared Curtis is the latest to come into the fold at the QB position for Kirby Smart.
Jared Curtis, of course, like Ryder Lyons, like Landon Duckworth, Keyshawn Henderson, these are names that we've talked all about in the fall into this offseason, Mark, just waiting for the dominoes to fall. Early on, it seemed Jared Curtis had a very strong pull with Auburn, Hugh Freeze really making it work. However, when it was all said and done, as the dominoes felt, like we always say, some of these recruitments go on to the very end, but when it comes to the QB, as other QBs commit, as other players come in, we see a lot of the recruiting landscape change, and that was no difference when the commitment of Jared Curtis. We know, of course, he's got the 5-star, have the opportunity to watch him obviously on film and some in person. Just he's one of those kids that you don't talk a lot about, but he's more of a kid of action. He's got extremely elite arm talent. What you gotta like about him when I watch his film is he's got a very unique. He's fun to watch because I like his creative playmake abilities, especially in tough situation. He's got a bigger frame, 6'3" 3.5". I would say he's closer to 6'4", 225. He just, again, one of the things when you talk about Jared Curtis being he's got that traditional frame, that mentality that you see in a traditional quarterback, but he's got a lot of unique skill sets. He just really explodes with the ball when it gets off his hand, and he's just got just like I say, when you hear, when you look, when you watch that velocity when he throws, there's just so many strong things about him, and I think he's going to be a nice fit. At Georgia, I think that his personality, the way he maneuvers the field, his skill set, and just his overall demeanor, I think are going to be a compliment for that Kirby style quarterback that can really nurture, like you said, obviously behind Gunnar Stockton. But I think that Jared Curtis is going to bring nice competition. I think he's a little bit more, I'm not going to use the word passive, but I think he's a little bit more quieter, kind of signal caller, but he has a lot of elite skill set and abilities. Again, as a junior, completed over 70% of his passes, marked for 2,830 yards, 40 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, while leading his team all, of course, to a state title. He also rushed for 637 yards, 18 scores. I think that he's going to have, I talk about that unique playmaking ability, and I think with that, you also have to look at, I think one of the biggest things that we're going to see, and it's going to be nice that he'll settle in Kirby Smart's offense, and be able to take a bit of a cue backseat to what Gunnar Stockton's going to do, is his consistency. I think that that's one of the biggest things. While he's got a big arm talent, elite arm talent, big playmaking ability, often where some of the areas of concern is that he's not consistent across the board. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see how he settles, but I think that his fit, his personality, his dynamic, I think will sit very well down in Athens. Just from a quick take from it. And kind of straying away, because I think when we talk about recruitment, we talk about the skill set, we talk about the fit as far as on the field, but I think that Jared Curtis is kind of an interesting thing when it comes to his NIL deal, and I think that we haven't talked a lot about it. Actually, Oregon was also one of those schools, Mark, that made a late push, but he ultimately chose Georgia, where he's substantially, according to his NIL, is going to make a lot less than what Oregon put there. I think some of the figures that I saw is that he's going to get in his first season, he would make roughly about 600,000 to 800,000 as a freshman. And then it would bump up to roughly 1.2 to 1.4 million in 2027. So again, it's very interesting that he was willing to take a pay cut, according to what his agent was saying in the NIL negotiations. But what I think is really the loophole in kind of looking over his contract, Mark, and I don't know if you've had the chance to look, is that leave it to Kirby Smart to find a loophole when it comes to NIL and negotiations. I think that it'll come to service a lot more, but it's really that year 3 where he has the potential of making a ton of money. And we talk about that in college football, unlike NFL, that the pay for performance is not something that is yet legal. But it seems the way that this NIL, this kind of loophole that Jared Curtis is having in that year 3 with his ability based on his performance, but it is not written like that he will substantially be able to make earning more than what he makes depending on that 2027 season. So that's an interesting loophole of how that NIL was managed to kind of, get that pay for performance in college football while it's still not technically legal. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how 2027 will play for Jared Curtis, because again, based on his performance in his year 3 will determine how much of a raise that he will get from that 1.2 to 1.4 million range that he's set to make in his sophomore season.
Yeah, we're in that day and age when you got to get the lawyers involved. You got to get the numbers crunchers, the accountants involved to make use of every penny and look for loopholes and look for strategies that can benefit down the road. and squeeze every dollar out of the situation. All right, we're on the move with you each and every Wednesday, 8:30 Eastern, folks. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. You can catch Leanne's work at Cat's Wire and also Rebel Walk, where she is the director of recruiting there, and catch her right here at the Voice of College Football, of course, and we'll highlight some of Leanne's work on vocfb.com because, of course, we've got our new website unleashed and launched, and we want everyone to head on over there and register and get involved in the forums there and check out Leanne and everybody else's work there. All right, next up we go to Ole Miss, and I want to get his first name right. Is that Azela? Is that how he pronounces it?
Well, I almost look at it like Isaiah, but
Okay.
it's pronounced it's spelt a little bit differently. So if you're listening, apologies for that on Isaiah Williams. I would have to say a pretty interesting commit as far as his road to get to Ole Miss. Of course, another top 4-star linebacker that I said that there was a couple guys that Lane Kiffin and his staff have been working on trying to flip. It would not be off season in Ole Miss if Lane Kiffin didn't have a couple aces up his sleeve, and he's definitely got that in the recent commit of linebacker Isaiah Williams out of Florida, Tavares in Florida. Mark, this is an interesting take on a kid that, yes, he was currently committed and we did flip him from the Florida Gators, but this is a kid that's going to be interesting to watch. And it's going to be interesting to see how Ole Miss navigates this, because what do I always say, Mark? It's a long way till December. It's a long way till signing day. And this is a kid who's an elite talent. When you watch his film, he's just a supercharged elite linebacker who has all sorts of athleticism. I mean, this is a guy that has such NFL potential already in this class. I mean, he just knows how to close gaps. He checks off all the boxes. Now, where my hesitation in this is that Ole Miss is going to have an interesting turn of events in that we were trying before the show. Mark and I were trying to come up with this is a kid who's been verbally committed to about 3 or 4 other programs. Louisville, we mentioned, and some other ones. So it'll be interesting to see, but this is just how things go in the navigate. This is the new norm where kids, we've seen it, Mark, similar to AJ Halsey. We think that, these kids have a strong foot, a stronghold, strong connections in one place, and then here comes somebody else with another offer. So again, this is a heck of a pickup. Don't get me wrong on this. Of course, we see his numbers there, the number 3 linebacker in the country, the number 6 to come out of Florida. I think that he's going to have a lot of potential. He's going to bring a lot to this Ole Miss defensive front, this defensive unit. However, my biggest concern in this one is how the Rebels are going to take the approach to be able to keep him, because again, they not only did a heck of
Oh boy, hopefully we get Leanne back here and get her back soon, because when it comes to recruiting in the transfer portal, boy, I'll just have to pick up the crumbs and do the best I can. She's talking about Isaiah Williams, a recent commit just this week to Ole Miss, one of the best linebackers in the country. And there's a few more out there. Well, we will look at the chat. We will let everyone know that please use the Amazon link when you shop. And it's one way that you can financially contribute here at the Voice of College Football without spending a penny. So grab the Amazon link in the description section of any and all the videos here at the Voice of College Football and use the Amazon link. Thank you for doing that. We talked on the Ohio State show earlier today about the addition, speaking of recruiting, of one Caden Dixon Wyatt out of California. And he can play inside, he can play outside. He's probably going to be more of a slot receiver, from what I understand, out of Santa Ana, California. And again, that's a big move for the Buckeyes as they get one of the top 10 wide receivers, one of the top 50 players in the country, Caden Dixon Wyatt. And of course, Chris Henry was also a top commit out of this Class 2 Ohio State. And Leanne, I was just tap dancing and letting everyone know if they're stuck with me for the rest of a recruiting show, then we're in trouble. So you're saving the
Sorry
day.
about that. The simplest thing when Mark probably already knows is we have to have an inside joke that as much as I do sometimes I forget to do the little things and plug in my laptop, and that's what happened. But we're good to go now. We have juice. We have juice in the backfield. So yeah, we're back in business. We're talking a little bit of Isaiah Williams, but you're talking about Ohio State, so let you finish that up and then we'll jump back to Isaiah Williams.
Yeah, well, basically, I just kind of ran it down in regards to this pickup out of California, Santa Ana for Ohio State, and he's a top 10 wide receiver. He's a top 50 player overall, and he's actually the first player Ohio State's been able to sign out of that school in Santa Ana since a guy that Buckeye fans will remember and few others, even though he did forge a pretty long NFL career with the Dallas Cowboys, and that was fullback Nikki Sualua. But yeah, so that is the fourth wide receiver taken by Ohio State in this 2026 class. And they're all highly thought of and highly rated, and they just continue to churn out the wide receiver haul. So that's a good one for them. And I really don't know much about this Trevor Gibbs, but I did want to mention him because Indiana's done a much better job on the recruiting trail, and they're in battles with some schools and some teams that they were never in fights with before because of Kurt Signetti pulling off that 11-win season, and they pick up one of the best linebackers in the state, and well, the best linebacker in the state, one of the best players in the state of Indiana, Trevor Gibbs. Looked like he was leaning somewhere else, maybe Iowa, but Indiana was his decision today. So Trevor Gibbs to Indiana, but we'll hear more on Isaiah Williams.
Well, just kind of tying, to speaking to your point and what you're talking about, I think a lot of people, the recruiting landscape is just so different. But you talk about, you mentioned that stat about Ohio State having to go into a school that they normally historically haven't been able to be successful in and go land some talent. I think that now with the way that NIL shifting, with the way find themselves smart having to get extremely creative where they go, because it's just like here in Texas now. Before the SEC came to town, you had A&M and Texas battling in the Big 12. SEC teams could easily come into the Lone Star State and poach top talent because all you had to do was pitch, hey, come play over in the SEC. But now when you got Texas A&M, and then you have teams like SMU, you have other teams that are building a bankroll that are also becoming destinations, that are becoming threat. You see a lot of big programs. It's not easy. And then, like you said over there, Signetti has, wins matter, culture matters, facilities matter. I know we're going to talk a little bit about it later, but all these kids go to these schools and they visit, and they have it. We talk about it when we've talked to the kids on the show that they all have their own list of determinants when they go on the visits. But when your program wins, when you have good culture, when you have good facilities, those are all things that matter now. But of course, all those things take time, money, investment. And with the field of recruiting, Mark, being so saturated, it's very interesting to see that, we talk about, like right here in Houston, the biggest topic, is Keyshawn Henderson. Obviously, Houston still being able to keep him being the 5-star elite. We know Alabama's knocking. We know several programs are trying to poach him. And the same can be said. But I think like schools like Indiana, are proving that not only are they turning the program around, but again, the biggest thing for a lot of these kids outside NIL, what we see is why schools like Indiana are getting top players out of state, or, schools that we wouldn't historically and typically see being landing these elite players, Mark, is because it's the opportunity to play right now. I say it time and time again, those days of, going to prestigious programs and sitting and waiting your turn in this day and age. You're lucky if you can keep kids that you're paying tons of money up. AJ Halsey, perfect example. This is a kid that has been a starter, was going to be a starter, and he's even gone to greener pastures, and now he's going to play at LSU in the SEC. So it's just an interesting revolving door. But I think what's becoming so popular, and why Indiana and other places, Iowa, just other programs you wouldn't typically expect, UNC, it's because they give the opportunity for these young players at the high school level, at an elite level, to get playing time instantly.
Well, Leanne, to take a break from the football for a quick second, if you want to, you can always check out the chat and see all the rumors about your celebrity in the chat. I'm not going to address any of those things.
Oh, I haven't looked at the chat. So if anybody wants to call in, I'll take it that. But no, I haven't looked at the chat. I'm pretty set on talking curtain and football right now.
Yes, yes, we are
So
locked in here. But you're a movie star. Your eyes are beautiful. I'm not going to discount any of this. I'm just reading what the
well, I
chat says, but I'm not
appreciate
going to
that.
argue with the chat, of course. Um,
Well, today, like I said, I gotta thank my makeup team and all that good stuff. They gave me a little bit of a glam look and all that kind of stuff, so I could be on the air with you. But yeah, let's get back to talking some football because, like I said, there's a lot of stuff going on, lot of interesting movement. A lot of news going on, a lot of politics. It's just different football. I'm sure. I mean, you've been in the business for a long time, Mark. I mean, even just recruiting has just changed. So, where do we start? Where do we tackle it from?
Well, we let everyone know that we're doing this every Wednesday, and so we want to build this week by week. So bring a friend or two or 50 with you. It's on the move. It's Wednesday nights, 8:30 Eastern. So please join us and tell people that we're here. One more on the docket in regards to guys that we wanted to hit on. Let me give this one a shot. Mayuaki Smith, who started a couple games at Oklahoma State. So Oklahoma State had a rough ride at quarterback and for the entire team last year. As they went to the Big 12 championship game 2 years ago, they were the favorite to get back to Dallas. This last year, they went 0-9 in the Big 12. And by the end of the year, it was pretty much just, looking toward the future. So this kid got a couple starts. They lost to Colorado 52-0, the closing game. And he didn't stick around. He's an addition for the Ole Miss Rebels.
Yeah, we pronounce the name so Mylua Key Smith. So sorry if I chopped that kid. I apologize. We'll make it up to you when we see you down in Oxford. But again, Lane Kiffin, kind of one of the underlying things. We knew that he was probably going to address the portal. We know that, of course, Pierce Clarkson, who had transferred from Louisville, has moved on from Ole Miss, and of course, we know Austin Simmons, the young guy who's stated and waited his turn, ready to make moves. Just a congratulations, a shout out to Austin Simmons. If you guys don't know, he's already earning his first degree. He's going to be walking here at Ole Miss this weekend. So talk about a kid, like I said, when we got him and we inked him, I knew that he was going to be the Ole Miss franchise quarterback. This is a kid who's been an understudy to Jackson Dart, came up in key moments, but now it's his stage. And but he's definitely going to be the leader in this room. But of course, like anything, we all know just what can happen when you don't have a strong quarterback room, when you don't have depth. So Lane Kiffin goes out there and is continuing to add to his QB depth, create competition. I really like this addition. This is another young kid, like you said, Mark. Had some opportunity down in Stillwater for the Cowboys. To be able to make some moves, but again, just really didn't have the opportunity. But I think he's got a lot of promising talent. Dazon Stribling is another kid from Oklahoma State that Lane Kiffin was able to join and bring into a squad. So it'll be a really nice compliment to see what we built here. He was able to redshirt last season when he was at Oklahoma State. Another thing that aside from talking about his skill set that I'll get into here in a second was that this is a guy who has 4 years of eligibility. So again, hoping that we can keep him around. We know that when we get a transfer quarterback, we've seen it in past situations. We saw it right now, this past, with the loss of Pierce Clarkson, didn't stay too long in Oxford when he transferred from Louisville. So again, it'll be interesting to see if we can hang on to them. But I like where we're going. I like where Lane Kiffin is going in order to keep the competition going. This kid's Russ about 6'4", out of Sacramento. He saw 2 games like we talked about this season for the Cowboys. He had in those 2 games, he had a 44 of 74 passes for 489 yards. He had 2 touchdowns,
4 interceptions and 1 rushing touchdown, brings a lot of versatility. Again, I think one of his notable games that really stood out for me from watching his film was when he played against Texas Tech. He made history down in Stillwater. He was the first true freshman quarterback to start for the Cowboys since 2022. In that game, he went 26 for 35 mark, 316 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, 1 rushing touchdown. So again, he's got all that playmaking ability up his sleeves. In that one game, if he was able to do that as a freshman in a team where he didn't really have the supporting cast to be able to make things happen, he's one of those guys I think that Lane Kiffin sees something in, a lot of potential in. I think he's going to bring a nice depth to this recruiting room as far as the QB, create that competition. Like I said, I think that he brings performance leadership. I think that that was the biggest concern. I don't think that it's not that people are not buying into Austin Simmons. I think Austin Simmons is very capable, but I think that having the veteran support behind Simmons to help bring out that talent is really what Lane Kiffin is searching for here. Um, Again, like I said, some of the things from looking at the short film that he has, but he really does stand out to me, is he's really excellent at maintaining his position to make precise throws. So instead of what we see typical in tough situations, we see that signature quarterback scramble. This guy doesn't hesitate. He knows how to continue to be precise, and he doesn't scramble very often. So I really like that about him, Mark. And he's also just really impeccable when it comes to his timing. He can deliver some of the perfect passes that I've seen to a wide receiver, hitting them perfect in stride, and even as he's backpedaling. Again, this is a kid that came out of one of the top schools out in San Mateo, California, in Juniper Serra. Um, During his time there, he led them to back West Catholic state titles. Again, he was named the West Catholic League quarterback back to back in 2022 and 2024. During his time there, during his senior season, he threw for over 1,700 yards, 21 touchdowns, and an offense that averaged 17.5 pass attempts and also rushing touchdowns. So again, he's another versatile player, a utility player that's going to bring a lot of depth in such a strong conference. Again, I think that this is a kid who shows a lot of flashes of potential. We've seen hit from the high school level to his limited playing action. So I think he's going to bring a nice depth. He's going to be a good depth piece for Lane Kiffin in this quarterback room.
If you can't watch us, or for some reason you don't want to watch us, you can always listen to us. So you can do that on your favorite audio platform, whether that's the College Football Show, Monday through Friday, or it's our On the Move show with Leanne every Wednesday. You can listen on your favorite audio platform. That means Apple, Amazon, Spotify, and also iHeartRadio. So keep that in mind as we build those out as well. And again, vocfb.com is a great destination now to catch some college football news, and also just a number of items that you're not going to see elsewhere. Let's check in on Leanne and what she produced for us this week. I know there was quite a bit here. So there is vocfb.com. Everybody check it out. Get on over there. Give it a look. We will leave the link in the chat. And I know I saw quite a bit out of you this week. Let's see.
Well, we did Halsey. I think it was the headliner was Halsey being a Bayou Bengal. That was a big thing. I was sitting and waiting on that story. Like I said, that was just one of the most interesting transfer portal. Like I said, there was just so many questions. I think we thought that LSU was initially out of the race a couple shows ago. Initially, we talked about it. We thought the battle was going to come down to Ole Miss being a bidding war. Was Ole Miss finally going to get a little bit deeper in those pockets and make a strong investment? We talked about Miami having those ties. Former Houston coach, who's their DB at Miami, DB's coach now at Miami already, kind of having that inside track. Miami willing to spit that money out and fit that bill. But when it was all said and done, LSU just came out like a dark horse from the backstretch and just really made moves in there after this visit. Like they say, when you know, and when Halsey got on campus to Baton Rouge, we knew if he made it to Baton Rouge that it was going to be a very tough for some other places to come in. But when it was all said and done, AJ Halsey taking his time, but playing in the SEC. Like I said, there's going to be some SEC offenses that better watch out because man, this kid's going to tear some stuff up.
We have definitely the hardcore Voice of College Football community here tonight. So if that's you, then certainly head on over to vocfb.com and register. And then you can be able to dive into the forums and fight fair, fight nice, be nice. I don't want to have to break up any fights in the forums, but get into the forums and trash talk a little bit there in a nice way and mix it up on college football. So we appreciate all of you. And we wanted to give you a website where we could go to and talk college football in addition to all the video work. So vocfb.com, and you can check out the latest from Leanne, Matt Zemek, and everybody else there on the site. All right. I wanted to hit these two items, Leanne. And again, we left the call-in link if anyone would like to give us a ring, because these are kind of recruiting related. And one of them is pretty close to home for you. I'm going to have to navigate this. Give me just 2 seconds because I got this Scott Frost business here. Let's go to this Mississippi State story here. There we go. So basically, to me, and let's look through this real quick. So Mississippi State is to build a $60 million practice facility. And they announced on Wednesday, hope to open in the summer of 2028. I'm not going to go through all the details. Those are the important parts of it right there. The groundbreaking anticipated in 2027, 110,000 square feet. Words cannot express how incredibly grateful we are, et cetera, et cetera. So they've partnered with Howard Industries. And so this is my take on it. And you're going to have much more of an educated take on these kind of situations, and not specifically about Mississippi State, but facilities have always been important to recruiting to a certain extent. But I think we've gotten to a place here in the last 20 years where everybody has nice facilities. You know, there was a time when there was this arms race, and Oregon gained a ton of attention because they really jumped out there and built the Taj Mahal and all these crazy gadgets and just state of the art across the board. But quickly, you know, everybody else that's in the arms race got right behind them and caught up with them. So I would think that if you're a top 300 to 400 recruit, anywhere you select, you know, you can only upgrade these things so much that you're going to be in a state of the art workout facility. You're going to have a training table that's as good as anywhere in college football, that there's only so much that you can add to the facilities that it seems like it's probably somewhat evened out to a certain extent. And I don't know how much you hear in all your discussions with these recruits about how much play they put into facilities.
You know, facilities are a priority, but like you hit the nail at the head right there. Nowadays, at one point there was an arms race. You know, you were building these high facilities, high level facilities, high cost facilities. But I think now with the way corporate sponsorships, with NIL, with boosters, I think that we've reached a plateau when it comes as far as what you can reach. Like you said, if you're going to go to Indiana, hell, if you even go to Brown, Ivy League school, which competes completely different. I remember being in trying to champion lights and all sorts of things was like, you know, pulling teeth because it just wasn't accepted at the time. But now, even at Brown and even at Ivy League schools, even they're trying to join the race for all these fancy facilities and trying to keep up with the Joneses. And I think that's the most difficult thing for schools now is I always talk about separation recruiting because, like you said, these top recruits are they're going to Ohio State, they're going to Michigan, they're going to Texas, they're going to see elite facilities. That's not a question, you know. So now when you're these programs, what do you do to separate? And I think that that's the biggest level of what do we do next? Where are we going to separate ourselves next? Is it going to be through our NIL? I haven't had much chance to look into it, but I know since we're kind of talking about the tail end of what drives, NIL and just a different culture in recruiting, talk about Kentucky athletic department, basically setting themselves up like an LLC now, or something similar to that, where now they can pay athletes directly. These are just new norms, new different things that programs are going to, like we talked about earlier with that pay performance that is still illegal in college football, yet Kirby Smart and his team have found a loophole to be able to bring that in order to be able to get Jared Curtis to commit and take less of a pay cut than going to Oregon and making more because of that one little clause. It's still technically in the grander scheme and the legality is still not legal. So again, I think now facilities are still going to be important, but it's going to be creative recruiting. It's going to be, how are we going to separate ourselves? That's going to become the important thing. There's going to be things outside of football that are going to, I think, now be at the height of how NIL is approached, how programs approach recruits and things like that. So I think, facilities are going to be mattered, but I think we've reached a plateau as far as what we can do at facilities now. How facilities are seeing, that they were 5 years ago. I'm not saying that facilities aren't important and that it's not going to be, but again, like you said, most of these top recruits are going to big time programs with big time facilities. There's not much difference other than the name you see when you walk in, the colors that you see, the area that you are. But I mean, at the grand scheme of things, they're these elaborate, these places, So now I think that the next stage is, where programs are going to go to separate themselves, because facilities are not going to be the top priority. And now, a lot of the recruits that I talk to are looking outside of football. They're looking at the business sense. They're looking at life after football. So what I hear a lot outside of what recruits are, and they've always looked at, but I think some of the higher level recruits that are they're going to all these high level programs where they know they're going to make lots of money, where they have elite facilities, the kind of where they start to separate themselves is, what kind of education I'm going to get. I've talked to some top recruits and they said, we're not, as much as we like a school and it's a top school and it's everybody's dream school and they have a ton of money and offered, they don't have the type of program, as far as the educational track that I want to go study. They're medical, they want to study, medicine or other places. And for them, that's not necessarily where they want to go because they have an ambition outside of football. So that's also another interesting factor. We're seeing a lot of smaller schools upgrade, certain departments and things like that because recruits and things are looking beyond football.
We are so fortunate to have Leanne here at the Voice of College Football with her wealth of expertise and experience, which tracks back to her days. She mentioned Brown University, where she got firsthand knowledge of the inner workings of collegiate athletics and scouting and the football operation, on through becoming a journalist. And currently she's at Catswire. You can find her as the director of football recruiting at the Rebel Walk as well. And again, we are proud to say she's also here at the Voice of College Football, of course, as our top recruiting analyst. All right. The other thing I wanted to bring up, Leanne, was this just strikes me as just, I don't understand why a school would need to do this. So our buddy Scott Frost did a heck of a job at UCF. But that was light years ago at this point, in the days of college football, light years ago. So he gets the job after he was out of work, and then he was with the Los Angeles Rams as an assistant. And so he gets the head coaching job at UCF. Fine. This is going to be his first year at UCF. They gave him a 5-year contract, $22 million. He hasn't coached a game yet, Leanne. Hasn't coached a game. He just got hired 3 months ago, and they're already telling him that if he goes to a bowl game this year, a bowl game, which 82 teams do every year. There's 41 bowl games. You don't have to be that good to get to a bowl game. If he gets to a bowl game in his first year, they are going to extend the contract a year to a 6th year. So just play this out with me. He goes to a bowl game this year. He goes 3-9 the 2 years after that, which isn't that much of a stretch considering how much he failed at Nebraska. And then they're on the hook to either fire him and have to pay him an extra year. out 6 years from now, or I just don't get it. They're in the position of authority. They're in the position of leverage. He has no leverage. He just needed a job. He's lucky to have a head coaching job, and they're already extending his contract a year for making a bowl game before he's even coached one game.
Yeah, that sounds like when I'm harping on recruits. Listen, I know that there's a lot of kids out there with exceptional talent, but again, I still have a big problem. I can understand portal players that you're going to put out and throw out some bigger numbers. But for me, I still have a lot of hesitation and reservation when programs go out there and pay, and these elite blue chip kids. I'm not saying that every kid's not worth it, because there are some kids that I've seen firsthand, that I think are going to translate. But there's a lot of top kids. I've said it, quarterback positions, big, that are extremely hyped, that have used that as leverage to negotiate these high level NILs. But again, my thing is, I don't mind paying them after that's again where it goes back into that play performance. Eventually I think we're going to have to get there, because how do you justify, same thing with Scott, with Frost. He hasn't been coaching, he hasn't really proved himself. He's lucky to have a head coaching job, but you're giving him all this stuff on a silver platter without being proven. Is it because UCF is desperate to keep a coach and keep consistent? Because that's the only reason I can see, is that they're trying to keep and hold him on so he doesn't leave in a year. And then they're going to be in the same loophole. Like you said, they're going to be out money, they're going to be out of head coach. But it kind of, just how you feel about is how I feel about, why do we offer some of these elite level high school kids based on what they've done in high school, yet it hasn't translated onto that college field? I'm good with it. You want to pay them after that first year and they've proven themselves, they've started, I get it. Should these kids, so I'm kind of in the same situation when I see, some of the contracts. There's some kids that I've seen get some pretty good deals, and they have yet to start. They have yet to prove themselves, but they are collecting a paycheck because they are living off what they did in high school. And for me, that's great and well, but when you get to the SEC, when you get to big powerhouses, everybody's the top dog. Now you're starting over. So, for me, I think UCF trying to make this move is just that they're trying to hang on to a coach and keep somebody around, a lot longer than a year. But that's a lot to be throwing. That's a lot of bones to be throwing Scott Frost's way after not proving himself. I feel like that's a waste in my opinion. But again, a place like UCF needs consistency in a coach, and I think that's why a lot of programs like UCF are willing to put those incentives in, without a proven track record.
Well, it's a lot of bones to commit to 6 years from now when he's done nothing.
Yep.
And he could
Exactly.
have a marginal season his first year, not even a great season, a marginal season, and then he could fall on his face, and you're still committing yourself out 6 years. And I'm actually surprised, because Minnie's a big Scott Frost fan, that she says this is insanity. So either our conversation's insanity or what UCF did is insanity. I'm hoping it's the UCF side of things. But we do have a call coming in. Go ahead, Leanne.
Well, before we get but I think it's going to go back. I think eventually by 2027, that just like we incentivize with coaches' contracts, I think that it's going to head that way. Like with Jared Curtis and that play to performance, I think that that's an inevitable thing. I don't know what you think about it, Mark, but I think that that's going to be an inevitable thing that's going to have to be in college football, is a play to performance, especially when you're talking about these kids. I mean, just the numbers we mentioned. And that's a pay cut. So we can only imagine what he would have made at Oregon if he's only going to make between 600 and 800,000 in his first year. If he does well, then in his second year, he's going to be able to make that 1.2, that 1.4 million, range. And then based on what he does in year one and year two, regardless if and also taking into account the starter, much like the incentives of the coach, you go to bowl game, you go to step, you get paid more. I mean, that's going to be interesting, but I think that's the direction that we're going to be headed by 2027, is there's that pay performance, scale is going to be something that we're going to have to talk about, because how can you justify otherwise, paying some of these kids what you're going to pay them in year three, if you're not basing it on performance, what are you basing it? Oh, he had a great season. I mean, come on, that's on their performance. So again, we're already doing it. It's just not legalized. And then it goes back to, that other can of worms that everybody's opening. We talked about, how much the Longhorns are projected to spend on their roster, and that's become a big topic about, with all the legislation that's going on, with all the court cases and everything's going on, how a lot of teams are just, recklessly spending money, or that, what do they call it, recruiting with a front loading, approach, let's just spend all this money ahead of time before it's no longer legal. So again, it's really interesting to see, the different directions, but I think that, eventually by 2027 or even sooner, that we're going to, pay is going to be based on performance, at least maybe not across the board, but at least for some of your, your high level players that are making, this much money.
We've got a call coming in from our guy, David Greenshield. But before I take that, I'd just like to say, and I mentioned this to you, I think on the Ole Miss show a couple weeks ago, I would like to make a project out of taking that $20 million that is going to be allocated to these athletics departments. So it's not all going to football, but just as an exercise, take the $20 million, throw it at football, take any of these football teams, Ole Miss, Ohio State, doesn't matter who, and look at the roster and try to figure out, how are we going to distribute this money? Are we going to have 3 or 4 tiers? Are we going to look at every specific individual and determine their worth? That the right guard is slightly better than our left guard, and we'll pay him $25,000 more? Or, how is that going to work? And then there's the possibility of injury. There's also the elevation of play and the diminished play, meaning this season, we're going to have guys that were off the radar, that were second, third teamers, that will become all conference players, be impact players, will be totally unexpected as breakout players. We'll have other guys who were supposed to be all conference type players that will bust and won't be nearly as good. And if this is guaranteed money up front and this is determined before the season starts, then you're caught in that bind. I've got a few ideas, but I'm not saying they're perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But that whole process is going to fascinate me.
Well, after we take this call, we could revisit that, because I would definitely, because it ties back to what I was talking about, what Kentucky's trying to do, getting their board of trustees to ultimately turn their entire athletic department into an LLC, so that way they can raise funds privately, and they would call it Champion Blue. But anyway, we'll take the caller. We'll get back into it. But man, you see, it's just so many things across the board.
All right.
Buddy David Greenshield here. David, what's going on tonight?
Pleasure to be talking to Mark and Leanne this evening. How are you?
Good. Always good to have you on.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. I did want to get to a few things. First of all, Scott Frost, going back to the place of his success, he's still living off the 2017 season that was UCF. He kept his job at Nebraska in 21 based on playing close football games, and that was it. I find it interesting now how they keep on rehashing that these coaches, as Mark's talked about on many occasions. Scott Frost Part 2 at UCF might not be as good as Scott Frost Part 1 at UCF. I think we all have our doubts about that.
Yes, I would be willing to lay a small fortune on that.
Yeah, a tidy sum of money there. Me as well, Mark.
Well,
Go ahead, Leah. I'm
it's
sorry.
like what it's like, and like we were talking about before you came on, it's like that bad sequel that, it's just like, when is it gonna, act 1, act 2, act 3, and again, not saying that he's not going to do a good job. A lot of coaches return home and they're able to do some, but I think that UCF is giving him too many incentives without a proven track record. And like I was talking to Mark before he went on, I have a problem with that, the same way I have a problem with certain high school level elite blue chip players getting paid a ton of money based on what they've done in high school, but haven't proven what they've done. I can understand when you go a little bit deep pockets for a transfer portal, even if it's a kid coming from the FCS level, because at least you've seen them at the collegiate level, you've seen them play. But there's a lot of 5-star players that I've seen up in person at several different areas outside team elements, where they just don't live up to the billing. And these kids are making a ton of money, and you wonder why they don't find success at that college level, because again, you're taking a chance on what you see them do at a high school level. But again, when you're playing the SEC, when you're playing the Big Ten, you're playing at big time schools, It's a lot different now. It's much like the NFL. It's a little different when you get paid to play now.
Yeah, I mean, we are, as I put the comment in there, we're living in the matrix nowadays. I mean, now that high school players have agents, now that we have players getting contracts, we're going to have incentive-laden contracts. We all got here because of NIL. I mean, I knew when NIL happened that that was just a path to eventually pay the players. They weren't kidding anybody by saying it's just about making money off of jerseys or paraphernalia or things of that nature. They knew it was a path to get the players paid. They didn't want to say the not so quiet part out loud and just say at that time, hey, we're doing this NIL as a path to get players paid in college football. But I think everybody just knew it at the time. And, the fact of the matter is, it will be interesting to see if anything comes about with legislation. I do wonder if they become employees or if, they go down the road. Remember, Northwestern tried a union. They tried to unionize. And I'm wondering if they go back down that road. Because remember, in the NFL, we have a players union, and they have representation. So, I mean, with us becoming the NFL light, with us becoming the NFL junior, again, how far are we going to take this?
Well, we were just hitting on it too, and I just pulled it up before you came up. We're talking about how the Kentucky Athletic Department is appealing to their board of trustees right now, to basically make their entire athletic department function as an LLC, and they would call it Champion Blue. And it's basically, what I'm reading is to create a private public partnership where they can raise money as an LLC and operate like an LLC. That way they can pay players, they can put money into all that kind of stuff. So this is another element, just another thing, another step that, a lot of programs are going to be taking, where we're going to operate more like in the private sector, very private, like a business model. Mark and I were talking about, some of the terms on Jared Curtis's contract, where technically in college football, the pay to performance is not allowed, but yet when you're looking at Jared Curtis's new contract in his NIL, his third year is based on what he does in his first and second year, because Georgia found a loophole. So again, this is just like some of the things you mentioned. We're talking about, there's just a different direction, a new way where we're going to be more like the NFL, unionized, where athletic departments are going to be operating like the private sector, and trying to find ways, because like Mark said, it was one thing 5 years ago, even 10 years ago, where you were trying to be in an arms race to have elite facilities to gain recruits. But I mean, I think we've reached our plateau. So now, we're talking about what are programs going to do now to separate themselves, to get not just high level recruits to commit to their program, but where is this all drawn from? Money. And you need investors to build these programs to get recruits. So, how are you going to separate yourselves from the pack?
Well, Leanne, that's why I was going to say Texas with their $40 million payroll is not a surprise. I mean, think about what we've talked about for years at what Texas has at their disposal when it comes to, how much. First of all, their athletic budget has always been one of the two biggest in the country. We know the state they have to mine from in talent. It's the best in the country, or one of the two best in the country, that in Florida. We know that they have a lot of boosters and donor class that's willing to contribute. Maybe some of that oil money flowing in down there could be. So if there was ever a program that was sitting on a powder keg and waiting for something like this and waiting to be unleashed, I think they're in that group of programs. A lot of people were joking when they came over the SEC. Oh, welcome to 8-4, welcome to 7-5. I don't think so. Not in this world, especially considering with all those factors in their corner. So I don't blame them on this $40 million payroll. This could be the tip of the iceberg for them. In fact, I would not be surprised to see this become the new norm for them, or close to it, in years to come.
I don't believe in artificial ethical standards. There's no cap. There's no rule concerning how much you can pay players. So who's to say what's reasonable and what's not reasonable?
Right. No, I agree. They're not going to I seriously doubt we're getting a salary cap anytime soon here, Mark, with this. I mean, I don't think that we're going to get, anything like that. I mean, at least I can't see it. I mean, maybe they're going to give this some kind of structure. I'd like to think so. And it's not going to be the Wild West as we talked about before, Mark, but I don't know. I have my doubts.
Well, the
Go ahead.
structure that's being given to it this fall, starting with this school year, is the $20.5 million that it's going to go to each and every athletic department, and probably about 80% of that, depending on how each school looks at that and distributes it, is going to go to football. But I don't consider that giving it structure. That's just giving it more money, and everybody's going to have $20 million to play with if they so choose. But that doesn't provide any structure, but it does provide a base for fill in the blank, Wake Forest, Houston, whoever. Houston, probably not a good example, but anyway, the lower level programs in college football that can't muster up much cash.
But I think too, that's why a place like Kentucky is trying to embrace and trying to be ahead of the curve, trying to set its whole athletic department like an LLC, because I think that that joint between private and public sector is really where they can get creative, because now they're, like you said, you're going to have to keep up with the Joneses, and it's going to
Yeah.
take a lot of money, but you can only drill the well so much before it's tapped out. So I think, I think what Kentucky's trying to do in trying to do this champion blue, create it like an LLC, is be able to, look at other avenues, whether it be real estate, just, untapped resources. And I think that's the direction that we're going to end up going, because like you said, there's only, especially in the state of Texas, you have Texas A&M, you have Texas, you have SMU, you have even SMU, even though it is not a power program, SMU itself is built with a lot of financial, access and boosters. So SMU
Yeah.
could very well be there. And I mean, SMU, I mean, they got off the Pony Express exactly because of this,
Yeah.
and now the very thing that killed the program is legal,
Great
and
30 for
now,
30, Leanne. Great 30 for 30, by the way. Shout
no,
out
I
to.
know.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So everybody is probably, ready to get back on the Pony Express down off University Boulevard, because SMU is one of those places that we don't talk a lot about, but financially, as far as Texas goes, SMU is a plethora of boosters waiting. So again, I just think we're going to see that shift of now universities, public, and because again, that money stream that they're going to get, it's going to go to football, but they have to keep other programs alive. Like Kentucky's got to keep their basketball program alive. They've
Sure.
got to be able, because that's really what brings in the money in basketball in Kentucky, is basketball for that program. And I think that it's just going to be interesting to see. But I think that now, universities are trying to find themselves a way to separate and how they're going to keep this money going, because at some point, when you're, like I said, everybody's going to the same place to drill, it's going to get tapped out. So now where do we go? Where do we look? Because, you're going to have to constantly keep up with the Joneses, because like I said, how do you bring recruits in? How do you bring investors in? Because for some programs, they're not winning. So how do they get recruits in the door? How do they get facility upgrades? How do they do that? They have to do other selling points. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how this off season into the summer months go.
Right. Leanne, I did want to get into your wheelhouse here a little bit, which was commentary on portal players. I was wondering, did you get to Penn State and kind of their acquisitions as of yet? I know that they got the linebacker Campbell from North Carolina. They've also gotten a couple wide receivers. The reason I bring that up, obviously the wide receiver position has been totally lacking. We've talked about that. Me and Mark and other podcasts have talked about that ad nauseum. I didn't know much about either of the receivers. I think they got the one receiver out of Troy, I believe the other receiver out of Syracuse. Just any thoughts on what they might be able to add to their offense? I don't know if you've already talked about them already.
No, I haven't. I haven't had a chance to. You caught me for a loophole on that one.
Okay.
I've been actually focused a lot on the secondary because it's the secondary players have been coming off the board from the high school realm and the transfer portal realm a lot right now, and I've really been focused on secondary. But I definitely will get that. But no, I haven't had the opportunity to do that. But we know that Penn State was lacking in, historically Penn State has always been known for its defensive prowess, but again,
Mhm.
another shift in is that you can't win ball games down the stretch with the way the dynamic is of college football with having a balanced team on both sides of the ball, so it's just like, and that's another thing too where we go back to all this roster building, is just how you keep kids and financial. I mean, it just all is tying back together, and it all ties back into the financial end of things. Football has become a financial sector where you want to win, but you got to build rosters and you got to and do all these interesting things. But yeah, the portal is quiet down. There's still a couple of free agencies. It's always interesting when you talk to guys now, and it's really now it's another thing of free agency. So like you mentioned, I feel like I'm almost covering the NFL back again because
Yeah.
everything is in that direction. And we talk about play to perform and all these things that we're talking about. It's very much NFL, it's NFL, an NFL model. But now, like you said, it's even trickling down to the high school, and I see it firsthand. Like you said, there's kids. I mean, kids that I work with that have agents already, and there's just so many different things to navigate.
Yeah, I just on the Penn State thing, I was saying to Mark, it's interesting. James Franklin was once a wide receiver coach, and he can't recruit wide receivers anymore, or bring in wide receivers to Penn State. And I saw Clad had him at Penn State in their preseason, his preseason #1 in his kind of post spring poll. And a lot of people are big on Penn State coming into this year. My question is just, do they have enough in the downfield passing game to win big games? But outside of Ohio State, that's always been my question about every Midwestern program, which is, do they have enough in the downfield passing game to, if they get into a playoff game, to score enough points to win?
You want
So
to know
I
if you
think
should
with
be
with
scared
oh
of Penn State.
what's that?
That's the bottom line. You want to know if you should be seriously
Yeah.
scared of Penn State this year.
I keep on hearing it every year, Mark. I mean, 2 years ago, it was supposed to be them leveling up. Last year, they had us at home, and, it was supposed to be their time. Listen, I mean, a lot of people feel it's now or never. They should have a dominant running game. They've got their quarterback back. D line. I've heard they've got a new defensive coordinator. Word has it, So, I mean,
On paper, they've got the best team in the Big Ten and maybe the best team in the country. That's on paper. One thing that I came across today that I thought was extremely interesting, and I brought it up to the Ohio State guys, they
yeah,
were maybe a little less overwhelmed or maybe underwhelmed by this point. But we went through, David, if you want to go back and watch the Ohio State show
didn't get a
from
chance to
today,
catch him. My
we
bad.
went through the Jim Knowles article that was posted on ESPN. I don't know, Heather Dinich interviewed Jim Knowles.
Hmm.
And what I found to be extremely interesting in that interview, so the bulk of the interview was about, okay, how did this go down with Jim Knowles, and how did Ohio State let him get away, and did Ryan Day not want him anymore, which Ryan Day, according to Heather Dinich, refused to talk about the situation. So this was all coming from Knowles, and it was coming from James Franklin, that Knowles, once the celebration at Ohio State for the national championship ensued, and of course he wasn't invited. And I thought at the time he wasn't invited because it was pretty much a done deal. Maybe
Right.
not all the T's crossed and I's dotted, but a done deal with Penn State. But the way Jim Knowles talks about it, it was still up in the air what he was going to do at that point. And that seemed like a final nail in the coffin. But that's all history, and that's interesting. And I find it rather interesting to try to put that together and figure out who's telling the truth and who's got a different perspective on this than others, because there's a few talking points there that don't match.
Right.
But in terms of how this projects forward, Knowles was very upfront to say, I sat down with James Franklin. I sat down with Drew Aller. We watched the last two Ohio State Penn State games. and I was brutally honest with them about who didn't scare us, who we
Yeah.
were watching out for, what kind of tips Drew Aller gives us in the passing game, what he doesn't disguise well, what is obvious, what's telegraphed to us.
Sure.
Apparently they had quite a film session breaking down those two games, which of course the Ohio State defense dominated them on
Right.
offense. So if you really read into not just what a good defensive coordinator he is, arguably the best in the country, but if he's able to swing that much intel in Penn State's direction, that's meaningful. And Aller was in the story too. He provided some quotes and said it was an eye opener.
Well, what I found interesting, Zach Smith revealed this on his podcast. Maybe you already delved into it, Mark. Correct me if I'm wrong. Knowles reached out to Franklin, right, for the
Yes.
job. Isn't that crazy? You know what I mean? I mean,
because Franklin didn't even consider,
right.
He's the defensive coordinator at the national championship team. He was looking at 5 or 6 other guys.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's now listen, I'm usually, he did his job. He helped Ohio State win a national championship, move on, have a nice life. I was kind of thinking of, Tom Herman after 2014 when he moved on to Houston. It's okay. Nice. Thanks for helping us out. Good luck. Best of luck, in your new endeavors. But there seems to be a lot of backstory to this that now it's coming out that makes it, I don't know.
2 big differences there. Number one, he's going to Houston.
That's true. That's true. Good point.
He's not going to one of your chief rivals. That's
Good
one
point.
of the best programs in the country. Number 2, he's obviously taking a head coaching job.
Yeah, that's right.
Taking a lateral move to Penn State.
Well, I mean, obviously the dollars had a lot to do with it too, Mark. I mean, he was looking for compensation here, which was a big part of this, So, I listen. He did his job. His first year was a little difficult. He totally upgraded the defense and was brought into what he needed to do and won a national championship. We'll see. But yeah, they have to level up that passing game if they're going to have a chance to win big games. It all comes back to that.
Well, they might have the secret ingredient.
Well, I did have another question for Leanne on portal. Speaking of Ohio State, did you talk about any of the defensive linemen that Ohio State had acquired? Atkinson or any of those other folks?
We did not.
Okay.
We have not had a chance to that, but we will mark it down. We know we have to break down Penn State, but kind of going back to what you're talking about, and Mark alluding to about, you can have a solid roster, you can look good on paper, but honestly, I don't think that we're really going to get a feel across the board, no matter what team you follow, no matter what team you look at it, until we see those preseason games. You can break down all the film from a team from past. Me having experience, I've sat in film rooms. I've broken down teams. You look at the players you have returning to a roster. You see what you did last year. You try to go back and look at film. But again, it's only a small metric of what you're going to have. Every team, every year is different. We've seen teams fall apart. We've seen teams gel together. And my take is you can only get so much from spring practice. And Lord knows this year we got hardly anything from spring practice because it's not existent anymore. Right. So I think now, as much as we can say and project, these teams, they should be good. When you have that much money invested in a roster, when you have guys that are coaching or position coordinators that have proven in other things, but we also have to remember what a coach did, what a player did at a previous school is only a grain of salt for what they're going to do if they're at a new program at a new school, because it's a whole different cast, a whole different scenario. So for me, I think the real taste of where we can really get about it, that's why I'm not a big fan of rankings and where people stand, because again, it's not till you see those first couple of games where everybody kind of, takes things out and see where everything is. The first big game, because if you're like Ole Miss with those. If you're like Ole Miss, I still, that's the one thing I complained about. Who made those 4 preseason games that were like coaster games that put us on top of the world and then set us up for failure against Kentucky? But that's living it, So again, it's just like, I think that those games, whichever ones you play, but like you said, that first big game where that's going to be a conference game where I think that's really where you're going to see where coaches stand, where players stand, where things stand.
Leanne and I work well together because she dismisses the rankings, and I'm all about the rankings. But I will tell you that she did talk about that the entire month of September last year on our Ole Miss show, where
Okay.
she was saying when obviously when we've had our conversations, you and I, David, about Ole Miss and that Kentucky game being a complete surprise to everyone. Leanne talked about it for a month. She's like, I don't like the way the schedule sets up because these 50-0 games over and over and over. And even though nobody regards Kentucky as being much, and we actually thought they were better at that point than they turned out to be, but they're still
Ask Georgia
caliber. Yeah. An SEC. Yeah, exactly. They only lost that game by a point, an SEC caliber team. And then so Ole Miss gets slapped in the face after they run through 4 opponents because they didn't have that early season test.
Yeah, sometimes I always say those games are like good for maybe playing your younger players and getting them playing time, because hopefully you're up by 4 or 5 touchdowns come the fourth quarter and you can start to play, your freshmen and players like that, get them some game reps.
Well, similar to similar to what we see in NFL preseason. That's what I take NFL preseason, because you're trying to, get that final roster. So you're not going to see your starter guys. You're going to see your guys that you need to see. Hey, are they going to be a fit for a team? Are we going to keep them? We're going to keep Scott. So that's how I treat the preseason. But yeah, I harped about it. I was on the soapbox that I just said that we were not, that Ole Miss, not trying to make excuses. But I think the biggest thing was it was great for the hype to come off those programs that, but those 4 games, the way they were set up, Kentucky was the better team, but we could have easily beat them, I think, had we had some SEC early games, because we would have been on SEC time. Kentucky, I think, would help prepare them, as they were already in that SEC mentality. They were already they weren't on this high of like, let's play Wake Forest, let's play, whoever, and like I told Mark when we did those shows, not taking away from those teams, but there is a different level and caliber of play you're going to get against Wake Forest or some of those smaller teams than you are against Georgia. You're going to play against Georgia. Your game planning is going to be different against Georgia. Kentucky had already been in that mentality. They didn't need to be the best team on paper. That's another example. You don't have to be the best team on paper, fully loaded with 5 stars, fully loaded with elite players. You just have to translate on the field. And that's my biggest thing. You can have a million, the Dallas Cowboys, perfect example, talent oozing, but the moving parts don't ever connect. The coaching staff doesn't connect with the top players they have. There's not that connection. Therefore, it never is going to translate. So that's kind of how I take it. That's why I'm all about seeing things in action, because then that's really when you can break it down. We can say,
They also have a quarterback that chokes in the playoffs continually.
And they continue to invest in him. That's the crazy thing.
Gave him a lot of money. Yeah, right. I would say, and Mark, maybe you've said this, Leanne, you can chime in. Are you one of those, Mark, that I think you've said before, should they release the rankings like midway through the season, or are you one of those believers? Because a lot of people have expressed that before, put out really the rankings by week 4, week 5. I don't know. Go ahead. I mean, it gives us magazines to read before the season. In August, I get to go to the grocery store and look at nice magazines and see preseason rankings and read your guy Phil Steele and do all that and get pumped up for the season by looking at preseason rankings. But
exactly, that's a good reminder. Actually, it being the first week of May, I got to contact my buddy Phil Steele, because he should be about 6 weeks away from being ready to come back on here. Okay, here's my thought about that. The rankings shouldn't matter. So anybody and everyone should display whatever rankings they want any time of year. I would have a system for the college football playoff that would not even involve rankings. So I have no thought about when the rankings are valid, when they're not. I think it's a free country. Throw out rankings whenever you want.
Okay. All right. I mean, you've heard that proposal though before, Mark. People have said that release the rankings more closer to midway through the season or after the first,
but
half.
There's a disconnect there, because we're not in the days of the AP and the coaches rankings dictating the national championship.
That's true.
Completely separate from the playoff rankings from the committee, and those don't come out until mid to late October.
Yeah.
Now, some people would argue that the committee is swayed by the AP and the coaches' rankings.
Right.
Nobody can answer that. They better not be. Then they're not doing their jobs. They're not a good committee if they're being impacted by the AP and the coaches' poll.
They've had a hard time finding a consistency on what sways them and what doesn't sway them over the years. I think, it's
Well, I've always said it this way, David.
yeah,
The committee has that when people say they changed their criteria, that's not
yeah,
necessarily true. They have a list of criteria that hasn't changed. It's been the same criteria since day one. They just choose different criteria for each situation. They go to number 1, 3, 7, and 9 for this situation. Then they go the next situation and the next thing. No, we're going to go with 2, 3, 4, and 8. And that applies for that situation. So I've heard all these criteria every time there's a situation and they apply it. It's not like they come out with anything new. It's just that they choose to ignore some of the criteria for certain situations and they end up doing whatever they want. And then they've got the criteria list that they can pick and choose from to apply it to back up their decision.
Yeah, it's like the NCAA. I feel like it's the same approach. They pick, okay, this is these are the people, this is the team in violation. This is what we're going to slap on the wrist. It's the same thing. I feel like you said, there's just not across the board. There's just not a lot of cohesion. I mean, it's just kind of hard to get a streamline that's across the board in college football these days, because there's just so many things now that are just up in the air, or that we're not going to be able to regulate or control at the moment, unless we sit down and try to go through the chaos, which doesn't happen anytime. I don't think it's going to be happening anytime soon. There's just too much to navigate, and then it ends up taking away from football.
Mark Rogers for commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get Mark Rogers a new job, ladies and gentlemen.
That would be a fun
Not a bad
job
idea.
for maybe a couple of years, and then I'd hand it off to somebody. Maybe Leanne. She would be probably the brains.
Oh,
of the
no.
operation.
Leanne, you need some work there. I mean, would you?
No, I may be a GM. Maybe that's as far as where I go. As far as what I'd go, as far as an operations job. But yeah, I don't think I want to be commissioner. It's like what did John F. K. said. I don't want to be president. Just too much. I'll stay in and I'll be general manager. I'll be like Oz behind the scenes. But yeah, I want to stick to football and recruiting. Not all the politics behind it.
I would love to be commissioner. I actually would. I think I would love it. Maybe not for a long, long time, but maybe for like 3 years. Get the sport.
And then,
and surround myself I don't say that in an arrogant way, like I could just fix the sport. Surround myself with a lot of good people. That's what
you had the right job though, Mark, for you. Schedules are.
I would love to take over
scheduling.
Somebody needs to get a hold of the schedules in general, because it's just ridiculous.
I've long been producing videos on fixing the schedule. What we're going to do right now is give Adam his time, because I just can imagine that Adam is probably like kicking and screaming.
I'm out.
Acknowledging.
Hey, last thing. Steve Day should let you back on the show. You should have had your say this week, Mark. I don't know why he dished you this week, but so he could just bash Ward Manuel. By the way,
this is what happened, and I did not see that episode. So Steve Dace did have me on to record Tuesday afternoon, and then he usually releases that, I think, later that evening or maybe the first thing on Wednesday. And I was a bit surprised because I saw Michigan podcast out, but it wasn't the one I was on. So this is what I'm thinking, that, he had something to say about Ward Manuel. So then he preempted our edition, and then he'll probably release that next week. I got hit with all the questions about Bryce Underwood and how good is he going to be and how good are we going to be this year. That's what I got hit with. But so he did have me on
the $1 million question
of Michigan podcast for this
$12 million question, Leanne. I think $14 million question.
No, the $1 million question. I feel like everyone wants to talk about Bryce Underwood. Let's wait till that game. We can all sit here and speculate. I get it when you get a high profile recruit, but again, that's how football's turning. It's like that. We're paying this much money for this kid. He's got to pan out. And it's going to be. I think that he's going to. He's going to have those young growing pains. I think Bryce Underwood's an elite talent. I'm still not sold on if it's going to translate at the level they want it to. I think he's going to have some growing pains. I don't think he's a DJ Lagway. I don't think he's a Keelan Russell. But those are kids that I've seen up close and personal. DJ Lagway is one of those few rare talents that that I knew was going to translate when I saw him in Willis, Texas. Like, everyone's like, this kid's not going to translate. I was like, yeah, he is. I told just going back to that Ole Miss, everyone's like, Ole Miss should have this Florida game in the bag. I said, you haven't seen DJ Lagway, have you? And there it was. And then again, it was another kid too, Bryce Thorne out of Milton that I happened to watch all through high school as well, get those 2 INTs. So that game was on young players, that translate. So it'll be really interesting. But yeah, I feel like the $1 million question: how good is Bryce Underwood going to be, or is he going to live up to the billing? And I think that's the hardest thing for these kids too. That's an under pressure that we don't talk a lot about. Is these kids are elite players at the high school level, but when they're playing and they're translating in big time programs, there's a lot of big demands, and sometimes that is difficult to handle. So I mean, but again, fans are impatient. They want everything now. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays off.
Good show, guys. Thanks, Leanne. Thanks, Mark. I'll let Adam get on here. And sorry I ate up his time, but
David,
great show, guys.
Oh, no, you're good.
No, he's
You're
not
good.
coming on. I was just going
to I'm sorry.
A super chat. Before you leave there, David, I just want to let you know that Wolverine,
yes,
whoever that is, Wolverine Gage, is letting you know that as an Ohio State fan, you are delusional.
Oh. Yes, I wear that as a badge of honor. I wear all insults from the team up north, known as scum, as a badge of honor, Mark.
You're delusional, David. You do not have a national championship. You do not have the best winning percentage of all time. You do not have more Michigan national championships than Michigan since the days of the passing game. You do not have more Big Ten championships than Michigan since entering the conference. None of those things.
Forget those don't forget those leather helmet national championships, Mark. They count the same. They count the same. Mark's already laid out his case, ladies and gentlemen, and it was a good one.
Rugby championships. Yes.
Right.
Thank you, David. Good to see you.
Take care, guys.
Thanks, David. Bye. Night.
So we have to give Adam his due here. So here's the super chat coming in from Adam. He says he's got it in for Drew Aller. Drew Aller is finished. Against Ohio State, he was a bust. Against Boise State, he was a non-existent. Against Notre Dame, he was a disgrace. Leanne, I am shocked that you will not acknowledge this. Rest in peace, Drew Aller.
How are we putting it on me? Why are we putting it on me about acknowledging? I would acknowledge if I watched Drew Aller enough, but I have not watched Drew Aller enough. So I never like to comment on a kid whose film that I haven't seen, that I haven't studied, because that wouldn't be proper analysis. I feel like if I can give an opinion, so now I guess I'm going to have to watch some Drew Aller film and get my take, and then we can have a good civil debate. But that's probably why I haven't given Drew Aller his condemnation, the nail in the coffin yet, because I haven't studied him enough and watched enough tape where I feel like I could make a legitimate argument that he would be done. So that wouldn't be a good football analyst if you don't watch tape and just make speculation, because that would just be going with the popular opinion, and that's not really analysis.
I have watched Drew Aller play 20 football games probably. And Drew Aller this season will be one of the best quarterbacks in college football, hands down. And that doesn't mean he's perfect. That doesn't mean he's great. And that doesn't mean that some of the things that Adam says aren't legitimate. He did have a bad playoff run. They played SMU, and basically he didn't even need to show up because the defense won the game and they won by 1 million points, and he didn't have to throw a pass until like the second quarter. So he was basically non-existent. Not his fault. His team just blew out SMU. And then they played Boise State. He was marginal. He was okay. But again, his team was so much better than Boise State that he wasn't needed. And then again, he had a bad game against Notre Dame and blew the game with a late interception. But he's an exceptional quarterback. Okay.
Well, I guess I'll be watching Drew Aller film this weekend, and then I will give Adam a legitimate take on my take on Drew Aller. But again, quarterbacks I think did a lot.
Game against Oregon.
Okay, sounds good. If anyone knows, I tell Mark all the time, one of my favorite things to do is watch film. I'm usually watching film at some point in the day. So I guess we can just add Drew Aller's film to the list. And in defense of Aller or a lot of quarterbacks that we talk about, sometimes I get it. Quarterbacks get a lot of the heat of the blame because they're the anchors of the offense. But again, like I say it all the time, everybody's got to do their job. A quarterback cannot do their job or be if they don't have the weapons in that backfield. They can't do their job if their offensive lines don't protect them in the front or protect them in the pocket or whatever little thing that you want to talk about. I mean, I tell Mark all the time, maybe I need to throw out more of that fancy football jargon out there where we're breaking down stuff, but I like to keep it simple because the game of football is simple. It really is black and white, cut and dry when you look at it down and when you break it down. So, as much as and kids have bad games, we have to remember that when it comes to football, and there's all sorts of kinds of pressures and stuff too. But again, you got to look at consistently across the board. Every kid's going to have a bad game, but when you look at the value of players going into the next level and how they're going to produce and translate, that's a whole different question.
I'll say it this way, Leanne, because you set me up in a good way to give it my perspective on this, because I think a lot of people, whoever's in the chat right now, think about the job that you do. Is anyone keeping you from doing a good job? Let's take an actor in Hollywood. If he blows his scene, if he doesn't cut a good movie, was anyone stopping him from doing that? Was there opposition? No, it was all on him to perform or her to perform. But in football, you can have two great athletes. You can have two great teams. You can have a great wide receiver, cornerback matchup. Every play, you could have the two best teams in the nation playing, and somebody's going to walk off that field and be a loser. They are going to be a loser. I don't mean it in a derogatory way. They're going to have lost the game is what I mean, because that's the nature of the competition. So somebody is going to look bad on every play, and somebody's going to look bad at the conclusion of the game. And these guys put more on the line than other occupations where pretty much everybody can be a winner if you can just do your job. No, all these guys could be doing their jobs, and somebody's got to lose that play, and therefore somebody's got to lose that game. All right, we got our college football show Monday through Friday, but tomorrow night's an all members edition. So get your membership at YouTube or on Patreon, and we want to hear from you and what you want out of your membership. And don't forget that Leanne and I get together every Wednesday night right here at the Voice of College Football for On the Move, 8:30 Wednesdays, and catch Leanne's work. There's a ton of it. Rebel Walk and Cat's Wire, and here at the Voice of College Football. Is there anything in particular that you would like to highlight?
No, like I said, we'll be hitting some practices in Houston tonight and tomorrow, hitting some high school spring practices, getting up with some recruits, we know it's evaluation period, coaches on the road, offers are going out, visits are going on. So definitely be getting some inside scoop. I have a couple assignments. We got to look at, who do we say? We got to look at Penn State. We got to look at some defensive linemen, and we got to look at Drew Aller film. So definitely mark those in. And all the time, guys, we love you guys interacting with us, whether it's through calls, whether it's through interaction on the comments. Let us know if there's teams or guys that you want to talk about. Again, Mark and I try to bring the top stories, the top recruits and everything, but we also want to talk about those guys that are special to your teams, whether it be Iowa State, Houston, or SMU or whoever, that FCS school. Maybe you're a New Mexico State fan, who knows? But anyway, we want to bring you this analysis. We want to bring you that top recruiting. So that's why make sure you guys like, subscribe, comment in the comment line, because like I said, you make this show interesting. That's why we love to take your calls and all that. We kind of just hit a little bit of the daily news, but again, thank you guys so much for tuning in late night. We're going to hopefully be keeping this spot. And if you don't catch us because you're on the move, you can always catch us on the replay, all your favorite live stream platforms.
Absolutely. And real quick here, this is the best way to track all of Leanne's work is just follow her on X. You see it right there, Leanne Herring RW. And that way, whether she's writing for Cat's Wire, Rebel Walk, or here at the Voice of College Football, that you can just follow it right there. So please follow her on Twitter. We appreciate all of you. Have a great night, and we'll see you back here next Wednesday on the Move.